The story begins with Johnny Mitchell driving his rig down a long, desolate stretch of Route 66. It's late afternoon, and the sun is beginning to set, casting an orange glow over the vast, empty landscape. The road ahead is quiet, with no other vehicles in sight, and the only sound is the hum of the engine and the tires on the asphalt. Johnny is on a tight schedule, hauling a load of industrial equipment to California. The journey has been smooth so far, but as he rounds a bend in the road, the truck begins to sputter and lose power. The engine warning light flickers on the dashboard, and Johnny feels the truck shudder beneath him. He pulls over to the side of the road, the engine finally stalling out with a groan. Frustrated but not panicked, Johnny pops the hood and steps out to inspect the engine. The evening air is cool, and the wind carries the faint scent of dust and desert scrub. As he examines the engine, Johnny realizes that the problem is beyond his ability to fix on the roadside. Something major has gone wrong, and he'll need help to get back on the road. Glancing around, Johnny spots a building in the distance, partially obscured by overgrown brush and the fading light. It's an old, abandoned hospital, its once white walls now faded and crumbling, the windows dark and broken. The sight of the building sends a chill down Johnny's spine, but he knows he doesn't have much choice. With no cell signal and nightfall approaching, he decides to head to the hospital in hopes of finding a landline or some other means of contacting help. As Johnny approaches the hospital, the atmosphere grows more oppressive. The building looms over him, its empty windows like dark, hollow eyes staring out into the desert. The air is thick with the scent of decay and dust, and the wind whistles through the broken windows, creating an eerie, haunting sound. The front doors of the hospital are ajar, creaking on their rusted hinges as Johnny pushes them open. The interior is dimly lit by the fading light outside, the shadows stretching long and deep across the floor. The air inside is stale and cold, and Johnny's footsteps echo loudly as he steps inside. The hospital's entrance hall is a relic of a bygone era, with peeling wallpaper, cracked tiles, and old medical equipment scattered haphazardly around the room. A once grand reception desk stands in the center, now covered in dust and cobwebs. Faded signs point to different wings of the hospital, their lettering barely legible. Johnny moves cautiously through the halls, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The building feels like a tomb, forgotten and untouched for decades. As he explores further, he begins to notice strange things. Whispers echoing through the empty corridors, shadows that seem to move on their own, and cold spots that make his breath visible in the air. In one of the rooms, Johnny finds an old dusty landline phone mounted on the wall. He picks it up, but there's no dial tone, just static, interspersed with faint, indistinct voices that send a shiver down his spine. Frustrated and uneasy, Johnny realizes that he'll have to search the hospital further to find help or a working phone. As he delves deeper into the hospital, the remnants of its past become more disturbing. He finds old medical records scattered across the floor, detailing treatments and procedures that seem more like experiments than healing. The walls are lined with faded photographs of patients and staff, their faces blurred and distorted by time. The air grows colder, and Johnny's sense of unease deepens as he begins to feel the weight of the hospital's dark history pressing down on him. As night falls, the hospital's atmosphere becomes even more sinister. The building seems to come alive with the echoes of the past, faint cries, the clatter of gurneys, and the distant hum of machines that haven't been used in decades. Johnny's flashlight flickers and dims, leaving him in near darkness, the only light coming from the occasional flash of lightning through the broken windows. In the depths of the hospital, Johnny encounters ghostly figures, patients and staff who seem to be trapped in a loop, reliving their final moments over and over again. These apparitions are not malevolent, but their presence is deeply unsettling, their hollow eyes following Johnny as he moves through the halls. The deeper Johnny goes, the more the hospital's terrible secret begins to reveal itself. He stumbles upon a hidden wing of the hospital, one that doesn't appear on any of the old maps he's found. The doors to this wing are heavy and reinforced, with locks that have long since rusted away. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of antiseptic and decay, and the walls are lined with rows of old, rusted surgical instruments. Johnny finds a room at the end of the hall, its door slightly ajar. Inside, he discovers a grim scene, a surgical table, stained with old blood, and chains hanging from the ceiling. The walls are covered with old, yellowed papers, research notes, diagrams, and photographs that detail horrific experiments conducted on unwilling patients. The notes speak of trying to cheat death, of extending life through unnatural means, and of the consequences that befell those who attempted it. As Johnny examines the papers, he feels a presence behind him, the ghostly figure of a doctor, his eyes hollow and filled with a cold, calculating madness. The doctor speaks, his voice a low, rasping whisper, telling Johnny that he's been chosen to continue the work, to complete the experiments that were never finished. Panic surges through Johnny as the room begins to close in on him, the shadows growing darker and the air growing colder. The ghostly figures that have followed him through the hospital begin to converge, their hollow eyes watching him with a mix of desperation and malice. They are the victims of the experiments, trapped in the hospital for eternity, and they're determined to keep Johnny there with them. In a desperate bid for escape, Johnny bolts from the room, racing through the darkened halls of the hospital. The ghostly figures pursue him, their whispers growing louder, their forms flickering in and out of existence as they move through the walls and floors. The hospital seems to warp around him, the corridors twisting and turning in impossible ways, trapping him in a nightmarish maze. Just as it seems there's no way out, Johnny spots a faint light up ahead. A window, the glass shattered and the frame hanging loosely in the wall. With no other options, Johnny makes a run for it, throwing himself through the window and crashing onto the hard ground outside. The cold night air fills his lungs, and the oppressive atmosphere of the hospital lifts, replaced by the silence of the desert. Bruised and battered, Johnny stumbles to his feet and looks back at the hospital. The building is dark and silent, the ghostly figures no longer visible. The nightmare seems to be over, but Johnny knows that the horrors of the hospital will stay with him forever. He makes his way back to the truck, which miraculously starts on the first try. The engine roars to life, and Johnny pulls back onto Route 66, determined to put as much distance between himself and the hospital as possible. As he drives, the first light of dawn begins to break over the horizon, the sun casting a warm golden glow over the desert. The story ends with Johnny reaching the outskirts of a small town, the hospital now a distant memory. He pulls into a truck stop, exhausted but relieved to have survived the night. As he sits down with a cup of coffee, he reflects on the events of the night, knowing that he narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. The memory of the ghostly figures and the hospital's dark secret lingers in his mind, a reminder of the dangers that can be found on even the most familiar roads. As Johnny prepares to continue his journey, he resolves to be more cautious in the future, knowing that some places are best left forgotten.